From where I stand, after spending a lifetime in the American gun community, it's becoming clear that the ATF's hold-on suppressor regulation is slipping faster than most of us imagined. What was once etched deep into the National Firearms Act now seems to be crumbling, quietly but undeniably. Are we watching the beginning of the end for how suppressors and short-barreled firearms are regulated under federal law? In this video, we're diving into how a single sweeping budget bill may have just handed the biggest legislative win to gun owners in the last 30 years. We'll break down what the bill actually says, the path it lays out for pulling suppressors out from under N.F.A. control, and what that could mean for things like Form 4 applications, tax stamp delays, and even how the A.T.F. handles its workload. We're also going to touch on what's next for the SHORT Act, how this all ties into a relatively obscure Senate rule called the Byrd Rule, and why this could change the future of the civilian firearms market for good. Between titanium component orders and political deal-making, to the slow unraveling of outdated laws from 1934, there's more going on here than most people realize. And if the Senate moves fast, your next suppressor could be a buy-it-today transaction, no fingerprints, no background check, no year-long wait. For decades, most gun owners barely brought up the National Firearms Act in everyday conversations. But this law has been the backbone of nearly every federal gun restriction we've ever seen. It came out of the chaos of the Great Depression, when gangland violence turned guns like the Thompson submachine gun and the trench shotgun into the boogeymen of the era. Even the National Rifle Association, yes, the same N.R.A., known today for opposing gun control, was working with Congress back then to draft restrictions on what they called gangster weapons. Suppressors, short-barreled shotguns, and short-barreled rifles were all lumped together and slapped with a $200 transfer tax. And in 1934, that amount wasn't just steep, it was designed to shut down ownership entirely. Fast forward to today, and while $200 isn't what it used to be, the process is still a bureaucratic nightmare. Fingerprints, photographs, multiple forms, and wait times that drag on for months or even a year just for the right to own a quieter barrel. After the N.F.A. passed, the N.R.A. and Capitol Hill had a fairly cooperative relationship. They even backed the Federal Firearms Act of 1938 and supported legislative changes after the tragic assassinations of the 1960s. But it all unraveled in 1971 when an ATF operation left an N.R.A. member dead. The fallout sparked a grassroots movement, and by the time of the 1977 Cincinnati revolt, the N.R.A. had taken a hardline turn that would define gun politics for generations. But here's the twist. After nearly 5 decades of protests, lawsuits, and lobbying, it's not a court ruling or a demonstration that's threatening the N.F.A. It's math. Budget math. This month, the House narrowly passed a bill known as House Resolution 1, or as some are calling it, the One Big Beautiful Bill, by just one vote, 215 to 214. Buried deep in the nearly 400 pages of legal text is Section 2 of the Hearing Protection Act. That section completely strips suppressors out of the N.F.A. framework. No tax stamp, no background check, no fingerprint cards. Supporters call it long overdue, especially for hunters and sport shooters who risk permanent hearing damage every time they fire off a 12-gauge at dawn. Critics say lowering decibel levels by 20 to 35 decibels will make it harder to locate active shooters. But let's be honest, suppressors don't make a gun silent. The report from a suppressed firearm is still louder than a jackhammer. The term silencer is pure Hollywood. Still, perception matters. and its perception that helped get this into a budget reconciliation bill, a clever move that avoids a Senate filibuster and passes with a simple majority. That's possible because the main purpose of reconciliation is to change tax and spending laws. The loophole? Suppressor rules fall under the Internal Revenue Code, thanks to the $200 transfer tax. Zero that tax out, and the regulation disappears. Not by debating the Second Amendment, but by changing a single budget line item. When opponents raised objections in committee, the Senate parliamentarian reportedly brushed it off. A tax repeal, they said, directly affects revenue. Case closed. The numbers tell the same story. Gun owners have now registered close to 5 million suppressors. In just the first half of last year, 1.4 million more were added. ATF data obtained under the Freedom of Information Act shows the system is underwater. Old school paper Form 4s often sat untouched for close to 12 months. Even the newer electronic system lagged badly, going from 90 days to 180, then all the way up to 270 days. Dealers are losing sales, buyers are canceling orders, and ATF staff are drowning under a mountain of paperwork and manila folders. If suppressors are finally delisted from the N.F.A., millions of records would instantly become irrelevant. That would free up serious bandwidth for agents to focus on real threats, not processing paperwork from duck hunters and rangegoers. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that this change would reduce federal income by about $1.4 billion over the next 10 years. And when compared to a nearly $6 trillion budget, that's pocket change. Advocates say the trade-off is more than worth it. Less bureaucracy, fewer mistakes, and more time spent targeting actual crime, not responsible citizens trying to protect their ears. Meanwhile, short-barreled rifles and shotguns may be heading in the same direction. A new measure, called the Stop Harassing Owners of Rifles Today Act, or just the SHORT Act, has been introduced in both chambers of Congress. Its goal is to eliminate barrel length restrictions from the N.F.A. altogether. Lawmakers are pitching this as a direct answer to last year's stabilizing brace debacle, when the previous administration tried to classify roughly 40 million braced carbines as illegal short-barreled rifles. Legal challenges exploded. Suddenly, folks who'd legally bought a plastic brace were facing potential felony charges. If barrel length rules disappear, so do those lawsuits. But the road ahead for the SHORT Act is tougher than for suppressors. That's because short-barreled firearms aren't just taxed, they're written directly into the criminal code as restricted weapons. Senate staffers are already working on language to link the change to excise tax revenue, giving it a shot at passing through the Byrd Rule just like the suppressor fix. Gun rights groups from Gun Owners of America to state-level coalitions are flooding Capitol Hill with calls, pushing for both bills to move together. Inside the ATF, reactions are mixed. Field agents chasing straw purchasers aren't seeing much public safety value in keeping track of serialized metal tubes, especially when a third of Form 4 applications come in with typos or duplicated serial numbers. Supervisors admit that the e-form rollout nearly crashed their servers last winter, and there's no doubt that the N.F.A. division would shrink dramatically if suppressors come off the list. That's how federal budgets work. Less workload means fewer dollars. But longtime insiders are warning that when Congress removes one job from the ATF, it usually assigns another. If suppressor enforcement fades out, agents might be reallocated to trace data systems or cracking down on forced reset triggers. What has some higher-ups genuinely nervous is the precedent. If Congress can use reconciliation to deregulate suppressors without a fight, what's next? Machine gun parts? One agent even joked that the day might come when a Browning M2 belt fed is reclassified as a hearing safe tool, all because of a line change in next year's budget. From a legal standpoint, pulling suppressors out from under the National Firearms Act sets off a chain reaction of changes that go well beyond just tax savings. First and foremost, that $200 tax stamp, gone. Second, suppressors would get reclassified under the Gun Control Act as standard Title I, firearms no more waiting games. Buyers would simply fill out a Form 4473, pass the standard background check, and walk out the door the same day. No mugshots, no fingerprinting, no government delays. Of course, state laws still apply, so restrictions in places like New Jersey and Illinois would remain in effect unless those states choose to repeal them. But on the federal level, all the old obstacles get swept off the table. Travel rules also lighten up. Instead of keeping your can locked in a hard case with a stamped form taped on top, you just toss it into your range bag like you would a sling or a spotting scope, provided your destination state allows it. Then there's the impact on N.F.A. trusts and legal entities. For years, gun owners created trusts to share suppressors among family members without each person needing to get fingerprinted. But if suppressors become Title I items, that workaround becomes obsolete. Inheritance gets easier too. Your kids could receive your suppressor just like they'd inherit a hunting rifle or compound bow, without needing a law degree to figure it out. Now, about the paperwork graveyard. The ATF's N.F.A. division has been sitting on mountains of records, some digital, some on microfilm, that stretch all the way back to World War II. A lot of folks would love to see those dusty old files shredded or burned, but legally it's a bit more complicated. According to the National Archives, tax-related documents like these are considered temporary records, which means they're scheduled for destruction. That said, archivists often argue to preserve historically relevant files. A compromise being floated is to lock away old Form 4s behind the same classified wall used for abandoned Form 1s tied to pre-ban machine gun plans. That make them untouchable by the public, dormant but not gone. If Congress moves this through, rulemaking from the A.T.F. will iron out the final details, likely taking up to 18 months, putting any real-world changes in motion by fiscal year 27. Now, when it comes to dollars and cents, the civilian market would feel the impact right away. These days, a decent suppressor runs around $600, and once you tack on that $200 tax plus fingerprinting and passport photos, you're easily in for another $50. But if the tax vanishes and the weight disappears, that same customer could grab the can off the shelf, pay only the sticker price, and be out the door in under 15 minutes after passing the NICS background check. Manufacturers are already predicting a sales surge, at least a 20% increase in the first year. That's pretty close to what we saw in New Zealand before their 2019 confiscation crackdown. Insurance firms say hearing-related claims would likely drop as more shooters embrace suppressed shooting. Audiologists have warned for years that unsuppressed rifle fire, often reaching up to 160 decibels, can cause instant, irreversible hearing damage. But there are some concerns on the forensic side. Police instructors point out that even though suppressed gunfire still breaks the pain threshold, the change in muzzle blast dynamics could complicate crime scene investigations, especially in tight urban spaces. The FBI's Ballistics Research Facility has already started upgrading their acoustic testing arrays to better adapt. On the political battlefield, this reconciliation play gives Republican lawmakers a flashy win heading into the next election season. They get to say they scrapped a Great Depression-era tax in the name of constitutional freedom, while also extending previous tax cuts and throwing money at border security. Meanwhile, Democrats are caught in a political bind. Cut the suppressor section, and they'll look like they're blocking tax relief for working-class gun owners. Leave it in, and they upset major donors from the gun control lobby. Some centrists have floated a compromise: keep the tax at zero, but leave the registry active. Pro-Second Amendment groups have mocked that idea as N.F.A. light, basically all the bureaucracy with none of the benefits. Inside the Senate, three numbers carry all the weight: 51 votes, a 10-hour debate cap, and the green light from the parliamentarian. On paper, Republicans hold 51 seats, 53 if you count the two independents who lean right. If the entire bill passes the Byrd Rule filter, they won't need a single Democrat to cross the aisle. And if the suppressor provision survives the final negotiations, insiders believe it'll be on the president's desk by early July. Perfect timing for Independence Day, headlines celebrating a new age of sound, moderated freedom. Now let's talk about the SHORT Act. That bill, formerly called the Stop Harassing Owners of Rifles Today Act, is on a parallel track. It'll likely get introduced as a floor amendment. If it passes the Byrd Rule test, the Senate can vote on it directly. If not, lawmakers may repackage it as a temporary pilot program or work in a 5-year phase out of barrel restrictions. For the average gun owner, the best move right now is probably to wait. Filing a new Form 4 application today means shelling out $200 for a tax that could be history by fall. Gun stores across the country are already seeing customers holding off, waiting for the day they can buy a suppressor like they'd pick up a bolt-action deer rifle. Cash, check, and done. That said, pre-owned suppressors are seeing a price dip. So if you care more about certainty than timing, there might be some bargains on the used market. Folks who already submitted in a form are wondering if the ATF will refund their tax. Odds aren't good. When the limited machine gun amnesty happened back in 1992, the fees weren't returned, the forms just got approved, and the cash was quietly shuffled elsewhere in the Treasury. Meanwhile, pro-gun groups aren't letting up. The day after the House passed the bill, Capitol Hill phone lines were jammed with calls. One staffer said, suppressor-related calls actually outnumbered those about foreign policy. Activists are framing this as a matter of civil rights, drawing parallels to how poll taxes and Bible taxes were struck down under the First and 14th Amendments. Volunteers remind callers to stay polite and get straight to the point. Offices don't record long rants, they just log your position. On the other side, anti-gun PACs are ramping up the fear-based messaging. Emails warning about quiet killers in public parks are hitting inboxes nationwide. Both camps are energized, and that just proves the National Firearms Act still stirs up fierce debate, nearly a century after it was passed. The mainstream media? They're playing the same old game. Splashy headlines scream about a silencer bill, even though the law still calls them firearm mufflers or silencers. Some health reporters are taking a more level-headed approach, citing workplace noise limits and OSHA-style safety recommendations. Others rely on trauma surgeons who talk about confusion from suppressed gunfire in enclosed areas. But let's be real, a suppressed AR-15 still hits 50 decibels louder than a jackhammer, and subtle nuance doesn't sell ads. Behind the scenes, silencer makers are gearing up for a tidal wave. One major plant in West Virginia is already running triple shifts, bracing for demand that could hit 700,000 units in year one. Domestic titanium suppliers are also cashing in, especially since Chinese alloy imports are still under stiff tariffs. Stocks in publicly traded suppressor companies jumped 10% right after the House vote. Strangely, the insurance markets barely blinked. Wall Street seems to view this as a recreational industry boom, not a liability risk. Civil rights attorneys are watching the whole thing carefully. If Congress voluntarily ditches suppressor restrictions, the next battleground may be the Hughes Amendment, the part of the law that froze civilian machine gun production in 1986. The likely argument? That banning new machine guns while letting pre-86 examples soar in price amounts to discrimination based on income. So far, courts have avoided that fight. But if suppressors fall through budget reconciliation, the government's old tax-based reasoning might not hold up next time. In the end, the fate of this suppressor revolution comes down to just two senators. If either one backs off, the whole provision could be cut at the last minute, and the House would have to eat the loss. But if both give the green light, and if President Trump signs off, then we could be looking at same-day suppressor purchases by midsummer. Some gun shops are already prepping for midnight release events. And if the Short Act rides along, it could finally settle the legal confusion around braced pistols, compact AR builds, and mare's leg-style lever guns. If not, that particular fight gets pushed to the next election cycle. That's going to wrap it up for now. So tell us, should the suppressor tax finally get scrapped? Is the Short Act the next big push? Drop your opinion in the comments. And if you want to stay informed on how this battle unfolds, hit that thumbs up, share this with your fellow shooters, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. This war over N.F.A. rules, it's just getting started.